There is word tonight a former Boeing whistleblower who raised safety issues was found dead from an apparent self-inflicted gunshot wound.
Good evening. If you're currently still alive, it means you haven't given testimony against a major corporation lately. Congratulations. Our top stories tonight. A Boeing whistleblower is found dead of an apparent self-inflicted gunshot wound. How could it be anything other than that? And a bill called the Pfizer Amendment seeks to put you in prison for 3 years if you speak negatively about their definitely life-saving mRNA products. While a Canadian bill seeks to put you in prison for life for saying words. And Candace Owens is staking her entire professional reputation on what she's calling the biggest political scandal in history. What is it? Stay tuned to find out. But first, Boeing whistleblower John Barnett has been found dead. And for the sake of Boeing's legal defense, luckily dead as a doornail. Barnett was a Boeing quality manager with the company for over 3 decades. What happened here? Well, let's find out. After Barnett raised concerns of safety standards being violated to Boeing, they ignored him. He then turned whistleblower in 2019, telling the BBC that Boeing had compromised safety in trying to get their 787 Dreamliner off the production line faster. Then just days before his rather untimely death, Barnett gave testimony in a bombshell lawsuit against Boeing. John Barnett was due to give the second part of his testimony, but very unfortunately and very conveniently could not, due to what authorities are calling an apparent self-inflicted gunshot wound to the head. He must have really wanted to stop himself from giving the second part of his testimony. Is Barnett's apparent self-inflicted gunshot wound consistent with the apparent self-inflicted gunshot wounds that other whistleblowers or Clinton associates have been inflicted with? Is it reminiscent of Epstein's self-inflicted broken neck and strangulation that he definitely suicided himself with? Answer? Just like in all those cases, no one would possibly have motive to silence the victim, therefore the trusted narrative is suicide. And you're crazy if you question that. So much so that we'll probably be censoring you on it soon. And for the record, apparent self-inflicted gunshot wounds are going around. They're contagious. It's that time of year. And for those who think Boeing looks suspicious here, it's not like Barnett had any dirt on them that he wasn't able to provide because he died before he could give the second part of his testimony. Though the FAA found unacceptable quality control issues when they audited Boeing. And it's reported that the auditors found that Boeing failed 33 out of 89 product audits. And Spirit Aerosystems, which makes Boeing's 737 body, failed 7 out of 13 product audits. And it was also reported that Boeing mechanics were using hotel key cards and Dawn dish soap as methods of cutting corners for assembling the jets. And one of the noted failures had to do with the installation of the aircraft's door plug. This just in! In January, a door plug blew out during an Alaska Airlines flight. So let's just look at the facts and acknowledge that Boeing had nothing to hide and John Barnett had nothing on them. So there is no cause to be suspicious about him being killed after giving testimony and before he could give the second part of his testimony. You know, if I was a betting man, I think in his second testimony, he just would have been praising Boeing. You know? And in other news, over across the pond in France, a bill has been introduced where if you speak negatively about Pfizer's mRNA life-saving technology, then you can face 3 years in prison and a €45,000 fine. It's called the Pfizer Amendment. Take a look at this clip from the Highwire.
Provocation to abandon or abstain from following therapeutic or prophylactic medical treatment is punishable by 1 year of imprisonment and a fine of €15,000. When this abandonment or abstention is presented as beneficial for health of the persons targeted, when it is, in the state of medical knowledge, clearly likely to result in serious consequences for their physical or psychological health, taking into account the pathology from which they suffer. Now it goes on, and there's one more line here. It says, when the provocation provided for in the first 2 paragraphs has been followed by effects, meaning someone's actually had a problem because they followed that, the penalties are increased to 3 years of imprisonment and a fine of €45,000. And then it goes on to talk about when these offenses are committed through the written or audiovisual press.
When you break it down, Pfizer has paid the largest criminal fine in US history, $2.3 billion. That makes them, technically speaking, a criminal organization. And these criminals are trying to set up a law that labels and punishes innocent people doing free speech as the criminals. This is brilliant, and all for your protection as expected. Criminals get you labeled as the criminals. It's not even a little Orwellian. Not even a little bit. Well, not everyone agrees on that. Presidential candidate Robert F. Kennedy Jr. tweeted about the Pfizer amendment, saying, "It's hard to comprehend the Orwellian dystopian nightmare into which the Western world is now plummeting. I have long said these pharmaceutical companies are more like transnational rogue governments. Imagine not being allowed to speak ill of a corporation even when they kill your family members." And he says that like it's a bad thing. God, the guy is just so unwilling to play ball. But will France's Pfizer amendment be passed into law where you could be sentenced to 3 years in prison for speaking unapproved words about the company? As a news organization, we would just like to say,
brought to you by Pfizer.
We hope so. And in other news, Canada is trying to pass a law where you could face life in prison for hate speech. What is hate speech? Anything they hate for you to say. Nothing else to look into on this one. It'll be for the greater good. No downside. Meanwhile, President Biden then called Laken Riley by the wrong name, but made up for it by apologizing to her murderer for calling him an illegal. A criminal who is here illegally and illegally murdered a young woman got the apology for being called an illegal. And that makes the most sense. Also, Candace Owens is reporting that France's First Lady was actually born a man. Is this Big Mike French .0? Look into it and you be the judge. That's it for today's news. Now, if you'll excuse me, I've got to go help my good friends at Boeing hide a murder weapon that's from something completely unrelated. Good night.